Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting, this work session of the Washington County Board of Education. The board and superintendent and staff are meeting this afternoon in work session. This is a time for us to, as a board, to receive information and to discuss and ask questions about that information. This is not a time for us to vote, so there'll be no formal action taken this afternoon. You should have received a packet. I hope you have that with you. There are 2 items on our agenda for this work session, and the first one of those being the Board of Education's fiscal year 2025 budget priorities. And so I'll turn things over to Dr. Savine to lead us in this portion of the work session. Dr. Savine.
Thank you, President Williams and members of the board. Welcome you to our work session. We'll start by focusing on the budget, but I felt like it was most appropriate that we ground our thinking before we discuss the budget and what our number one focus is, and that's student learning. And I can't think of a better way to start our thinking regarding the FY25 budget process and priorities than looking at just last week, our first day video.
We are so happy that you came to school today and that you're joining us for another school year at Northern Middle School. Welcome back.
You know, the first day of school is always exciting. I know our teachers, staff, and administrators have been working hard to hone their skills in professional learning throughout the summer months. I've enjoyed what I've seen on the first day as students have been engaged in meaningful learning experiences from day one.
I got a chance to see a huge gamut, a big range of your schools. I got to see Tech today, I got to see Salem, I got to see an opportunity at Daub. We're here at Barbara Ingram, and each of these schools brings something a little different and has a unique take on how to support young people and their families in a unique way, and I think that's exactly what we need.
We're so excited for the 2023-24 school year. I know as a superintendent in my second year, I know the talent that we have in our schools with our students and staff. I know this is going to be a great year.
First day of school is just energy. It's a blank slate. I have something new ahead of me, and so whether you're a pre-K student or whether you're a 12th grade student and you're coming to the end or the beginning, you have this moment that is just wide open and wonderful.
I want to credit our communications and technology team. I think that's worth a little wow. What do you think? Yes. First day, meaningful learning. That drives everything. It speaks to what we're about as an educational institution. Certainly the work of this board and your budget priorities, you see a focus on instruction, but also supporting instruction, culture and climate, as well as safety and security, complementing the work of our C&I team. It's all meaningful and allows for creating environments where our students can reach their full potential and engage in inspiring learning experiences. As I look at the budget priorities of this board, it's hard to believe a year has passed, and about this time last year, we brought forward some recommended priorities at that time that this board discussed in a work session, and then based on the discussion and agreement and eventual adoption of the board, we had four guiding priorities of the budget: combating inflation, safety, security, mental health, and behavior supports. Third one, salary and compensation to attract and retain staff. And then the fourth, meeting the requirements of the blueprint. We talked at that time about how important it would be to have consistency over time with those four priorities, because it would allow us to track on an annual basis how we were achieving in those areas. And I'm pleased to sit here today or in front of you, and I'll quickly turn it over to Mr. Prue in a moment. But I'm proud to share with you that those four priorities, and you will see that we made very good progress in each of those four areas. But then there are some opportunities that remain as we plan for the FY25 budget process. But I just want to thank this board for how you've embraced this process and set priorities for the superintendent from a budget standpoint and our team. That has allowed us to be proactive as we meet with our school principals and department leads to make sure that we're bringing forward a proposed budget that truly addresses the needs of the district, and it's aligned with the budget priorities of the board. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Prue.
Thank you, Dr. Svine. Good afternoon, members of the board. So staff has put together two documents for you. One we'll have here on the screen in just a minute, but which is really a consolidation. But of the two documents you have the PowerPoint we'll share here in a minute, which is a consolidated effort to look at how the funding that was provided both from state and local sources, how that came together, and how the board allocated those funds on a much larger scale. And the second is really a more of a tickler list of individual positions or funding sources or line items that we were able to impact over the course of the year. So give me an opportunity here. We'll walk you through.
Will you?
There we go. Let's try that again. There we go. So we'll give you a walkthrough. Of course, starting again, Dr. Svine just mentioned the four priorities. I think you're well versed in what those priorities are. We talked about them over the course of the last year as well, but these were our FY24 priorities that you see on the screen. And looking at each of them, what we tried to do is give you a sense of what was actually added to the budget and what was excluded to the budget. So this takes a look at really two things. What came forward from superintendent's draft budget, what fell off the table as we got closer to and finally approved the final budget in June. And there's a few places where I actually look at some things that actually staff cut that never made it to the board, and I'll try to highlight for those for you as well. So looking at the area of combating inflation, we were able to add $1.7 million across numerous line items in the budget to address the growing inflation that we've seen over the last couple of years. A lot of it stemming out of the pandemic. And at the last minute, what you see there excluded from the budget, we excluded about $178,000 or 10% of our overall request on that in that area or that goal area. So in truth, as we looked at the budget, we were closer to 1.9 million, which was what we were trying to impact, and we ended up closer to the $1.7 million number. Looking at safety, security, mental health, and behavioral supports, this was an area significantly impacted, and I think I'll share tangentially that as I was out at schools last week, and one school in particular talked with a 10-year veteran who was at a school who said that he felt like his school was appropriately staffed for the first time in the 10 years he had been there. And this is one of the areas that we definitely hit hard. 76.6 FTE positions added to the budget in this particular area. $50,000 added for additional safety and security equipment. $45,000 added so that we had summer wages for our school safety and security assistants. So those individuals that we added over the course of last year, we hadn't really planned for them to work summer school, but we really felt like that was an opportunity to continue for them to build relationships and ensure that the safety and security level we provide throughout the school year carried into our summer sessions as well. What ultimately got excluded from the budget was a student intervention specialist that we deleted from the budget late in. And you also see a reduction in safety and security. And so as you look at this number on the safety and security, it looks like you netted to zero. But for clarity, we had proposed a $100,000 increase in safety and security increase and ended with 50. So 50 was added and 50 was cut as we balanced the budget towards the end of June. Looking at salary compensation to attract and retain staff, and as Dr. Savine mentioned, this is one of those areas where perhaps we have a little bit more growth opportunity, and perhaps we weren't as strong as we had hoped to be. When we look at step and scale adjustments for teachers and administrators, we were able to add a step in 1%, effectively added a 3% increase for all of our teachers and our administrators. I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth on this one. What we left off the table was we had hoped for this in total to be about a 7% increase. So we left 3.5% off the table, salary and scale adjustment for teachers and administrators. Looking at our support staff, we were able to support a step and 3.5% scale adjustment for our educational support personnel, but we lost 2.5%. Again, this is an area where we were able to do about a 6% raise, and we were hoping to do closer to 8.5%. We were able to do targeted adjustments in areas of support needs. I think as we've talked about, we were able to add an additional salary incentive for some of our paraprofessionals that are working in some of our most difficult conditions and with some of our most difficult programs. We wanted to do more. We ultimately added 10% there. We wanted to do 12%. Also for our second shift custodians, we were hoping to do a little bit better on our shift differential for our second shift custodians. I think we landed at 5%. We were hoping to do 7% more. So those were areas where I think would be an area of focus potentially for the board in the coming year, because that's an area that we wanted to do so much more and it seemed like we fell short. But I think as people have asked, when we go back to some of the previous slides, we felt like a focus on staff, a focus on putting hands at the point of execution in the schools was more important at this juncture. That the staff that were struggling with behaviors and other scenarios were seeing that additional staff was coming and they were getting help. Actually created, I think, a little bit more benefit than the salary increase. Lastly, looking at the requirements of the Maryland Blueprint. This is an area where we added significant positions. 42 positions were added to the budget here in areas of pre-K. Predominantly, half of these positions were in our EL population to really provide support for what's really a growing population. I think we've talked about the number. WCPS, Washington County, was the leader in growth in EL students last year, year over year, in the state on a percentage basis, where we grew over 30%. We also added $3.6 million to support in college and career readiness, and this really falls into two large buckets. This is funding that we set aside for our dual enrollment classes for our students to work on getting college credit while they're still in high school, as well as approximately $1.6 million that is in our set aside for the work we're doing with the Western Maryland Consortium to provide career guidance and support and counseling for students over the next year, and that's an item that will continue. This is an item we didn't have to exclude anything from the budget. Of course, this is an area that was filled essentially with mandates that we filled, making sure that in the area of EL and pre-K and others that we were meeting 75% of the funding that we had following students. So nothing here fell off the table. Lastly, there were just a few things that fell into what we like to really call other initiatives. We had 10 positions added here. These were places like our payroll support, where we added an additional person. That's one example of positions that were added. And we had 4 positions here that fell out of the budget towards the end. And some of those, for instance, I know a facilities project manager is on that list with our growing list of capital projects and how the state has been able to address some additional funding. That's an area of support. We really need some additional help, but really never made the superintendent's budget because there just were too many other competing needs. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Dr. Svan, and staff is here, and we're happy to answer any questions you have on the documents in front of you.
Thank you, Mr. Prue. I appreciate that overview. And before I turn it back over to President Williams and board members for discussion, I just want to extend my appreciation to Mr. Prue and the entire finance team, as well as senior leadership, for their continued work and review of not only the FY24 budget process, but also preparation for today's work session. I do want to, as a point of emphasis, reference just simply once again those 4 budget priorities established last year, and what I would recommend as superintendent consistency going into this year, because I think those priorities remain the same, but as Mr. Prue has referenced, perhaps the greatest opportunity and is in the area of salaries and compensation. Recognize that this board and staff was in a really challenging circumstance last year, recognizing that all 4 of the areas, the priorities of the budget were critical in nature. And as Mr. Prue has just referenced, significant impact in each of those 4 areas, but as we look at where we are at this point, we see that perhaps salaries and compensation is an area of most significant focus as we look to FY25. So I will pause there, President Williams, and we will open it up to board members for conversation, discussion, and we welcome your feedback as we look to move in and establish priorities in the process for FY25.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions, any comments? Dr. Zentmeyer?
Jeff, on the last page, other initiatives, there's no dollar values attached. Can you give us some kind of idea of what each of those cost, the actual budget, and what was excluded?
I know the team is behind me. In terms of items that were funded, I'm going to throw a ballpark number, and perhaps they'll come up with a better number while I'm talking. Give or take, probably 900,000 to $1 million was added for those 10 positions. And looking at the positions that were not funded, probably 300,000, if I'm speculating right. I see Eric's crunching away back there. He'll correct me if I've misspoken.
Thank you.
Think time, processing time? Mr. Bickford?
I can add some discussion points here. Looking at the priorities for 2024, I was sort of immediately ranking them in my head for 2025. I would agree, salary compensation, I would move to number 1. And I think we did a good job of combating inflation. Seems to be slowing down a bit, so maybe we'll get good news on that front, but I imagine we'll still have certain things increase in price as they always do. But I was thinking salary number one, safety and security number two, trying to get a picture in my head. I know this is a big question, but when we're talking about meeting the requirements of the blueprint, can you give an overview of what are some of the things that may have to be funded in 2025 that are new?
The big one in 2025 is an additional $63 per student in the area of technology. So that is an area where we'll be looking to increase. Off the top of my head, I believe that is the only additional funding initiative heading into 25. And then any portion of new funding may be earmarked. So if we have an increase in EL students, 75% of that new revenue will have to target EL students. If we have an increase in pre-K, and I believe in FY25, we're also talking about now funding Tier 2 students. So any of that funding above and beyond what we received this year, 75% has to be targeted toward pre-K. So what we know is that very little of our state money, and to some extent the county money, under the blueprint is flexible. It's very much prescribed in terms of how that money is spent. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't use some of that money to pay salaries. So for instance, as we're looking at new money we might have in EL, the first thing we want to consider is the money is all following the student, that salary money also follows the student. So we'll want to look at what's the board's initiative that they're looking to do in terms of salaries, figure out what the cost of that is in EL prior to determining whether there's more room for new positions or other programming within the EL bucket per se. So we'll be working through some of those things as we calculate the proposed budget.
Yeah, and obviously safety and security is extremely important. I feel like in the 2024 budget we've been making significant strides through the years, including in 2024 hiring the security assistants. Of course, all of our schools now have secure vestibules, correct?
That's correct.
Got it. Do you anticipate other, I mean, I know you're going through the budget process, but wants and needs for mental health supports that we weren't able to do in 2024 that may come forward that we should be mindful of?
I think I might defer to Dr. Webster, who I know is behind me on that particular question. But I think while maybe she's coming forward, I might say, an area for the board to consider would be whether they see a need and desire to expand the role of the security assistants and expand the scope. So at this point, we're servicing 11 schools, middle school and high schools in the city. Do we want to expand to our secondary schools in Clear Spring and Smithsburg and Hancock and so forth? Do we want to expand to some of our higher need elementary schools in the city as well, where we have some challenges? So that would be another area that I might consider on safety and security.
Thank you. Yeah, good question. And I support Mr. Prue's questions around how we can expand our safety and security assistance and access across campuses for secondary schools and specific elementary schools. In terms of mental health supports, right now it might be too early to say. There's a significant grant money available from the state of Maryland that right now our student services team is in the process of meeting with local agencies to present what our needs are. And those local agencies can present grant applications for our potential endorsement. And some of the things that local agencies are thinking of applying for grant funds for would provide significant mental health supports to students in our community. So I think at this point, we'd probably put a pin in that question and see how that grant money plays out and where we are, 4 or 5 months from now.
Okay, good. That's helpful.
I think
Thank you.
Dr. Webster just deferred all her money to me.
No, I did not.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm looking at the handout that we received that is 4 columns, budget priorities, and looking at page 1, the second column shows the items that were funded in fiscal year '24, the items that were unfunded in fiscal year 24 is the next column. So looking at safety and security, mental health, and behavioral supports, as Mr. Bickford said, I think we did an excellent job in addressing that area, and there were many items that we were able to include in that budget. As I look at what was unfunded, I see $50,000 that was reduced from the safety and security equipment budget. So my question is, are there things that would have been in the 24 budget that fell under equipment that would be purchased if included in this year's budget, in fiscal year 25's budget, that would be one-time purchases or things? Do you follow me? It's not something that would be a reoccurring, that would have to be replenished. And do you have something in mind that would have taken that $50,000 for this year that would be a one-time cost, or something that would be a recurring cost, perhaps less than $50,000? That's a lot. Did you get all?
No, I think I got
Did you
it.
get all that?
You know, we have talked about additional software and visitor management software that can also make our vestibules and our schools more secure. That is something that has, of course, an upfront cost, small amounts of equipment, and of course a software cost, and then an ongoing support cost. So that is something that we could have earmarked some of that $50,000 towards that expenditure. And staff will be looking for opportunities in the budget where there may be line item savings that we could look and ask the board for a budget adjustment to go ahead and purchase. This line typically has been our expansion and recycle line for badge swipes, hallway and exterior cameras, two-way radio communication within our schools. This is the line that Mr. Ganley typically uses for those, and oftentimes we get to a point, sometimes mid-year, where we've got very little bit of funding left, and we're trying to hold a little bit back to manage an emerging need that has to be taken care of, or I'm looking to Mr. Brandenburg and Mr. Sisler and saying, I need a budget adjustment into the operations category to be able to handle this. So, it's a little bit more of status quo. We got some growth. We got some great growth with $50,000. That's an area we can always continue to grow to expand our security footprint.
Thank you, Mr. Prue. Then looking at page 3 of 3, other initiatives. You mentioned the project manager for large capital projects that didn't make it into the fiscal year 24 budget. Are you thinking that that is something that should be included, that that is really a position that is going to be necessary as we move ahead with the building of a new elementary school and future projects?
I speak for myself selfishly, looking out for a team, of course, that I supervise, but looking at our EFMP, we have the new Downsville Pike Elementary School. Within FY24, the state funded 12 capital systemic projects, plus public-private partnerships we have going and other projects, and the EFMP looks out that 2 years after we open the Downsville project, we're looking at another elementary consolidation, and 2 years after that, we're potentially looking at a regional grade 6 to 12 middle high school building. So when you have that kind of piggyback rolling one after another, large scale projects, I think we definitely will need additional hands within the facilities team to handle that. But I also recognize that that's a conversation that is ultimately to the superintendent's discretion to decide whether it makes his cut for his recommended budget, and we as a team, as a senior staff team, will decide whether that falls in the greatest priorities. But personally, it is high on my list. I would also highlight the transportation routing specialist. Transportation routing becomes more and more difficult each year, the more the demographics of our community change with students in transition or the growth within our special ed ranks. that role becomes more and more difficult all the time, and we actually incur significant overtime with the individual router that we have currently who does that job and does a fantastic job.
Thank you. So going back and looking at the other initiatives, the column where things were funded in fiscal year '24, I would imagine we'll want to keep the payroll specialist and that would continue into the '25 budget. Are we finding that the elementary administrative assistants have proven to be everything we'd hoped they'd be, and we want to continue those positions into fiscal
yes.
year '25? And I would hope that we would want to keep those 3 contingency teachers. Have we used all 3 of those contingency teachers? Is there a need for upping that number? Would that be a recommendation?
So yeah, we were very grateful to have the contingency teachers in the budget as Dr. Palmer was carefully monitoring. She checks our elementary school class size regularly and sends reports and analysis of where we may want to add teachers. We did quickly use those 3. Our reflection when Dr. Palmer and I thought we definitely see changes where in some of our smaller schools, it creates a challenge when you can have 5 students move in to a single round or 2-round school, and your class sizes can go higher than what we like to see them. We definitely try to keep our elementary school class sizes low, and so when that happens, we add a teacher, and then we have smaller class, then the class sizes may be 15 to 18. So we're weighing that piece always, so it is helpful to have those contingency teachers. I would say in next year's budget, we would want at least 3, if not more. As we think about just being able to be responsive to our schools as we see changes in enrollment. We also reach a point in the staffing season where the idea of pulling a teacher from a school, so let's say enrollment didn't pan out and you still have smaller class sizes in an elementary school, we reach a point where it has been our policy not to pull teachers because that's disruptive to pull a teacher from, one school to another a week before school starts. And we just know that is a challenge for staff and not good for staff morale. So we think we would definitely need 3 and potentially more.
Thank you. And then with regard to the 3 elementary teachers that were added to reduce class size, they were added in fiscal year '23, kept in '24. Is there a need to keep that number at 3, and is there a need to consider more than 3?
So I think when we think about this line, once the board has added staff positions or programming, let's say, to the budget, we always look at what are the changes that necessarily need to be made. So oftentimes I would say with classroom teachers, short of adjustments from school to school, I can't recall a time, at least in my 6 budget cycles, where we've said actually we're going to reduce classroom teachers and pull those positions back away. So I think I would say, Mrs. Williams, that those positions, having been added in '23, still here, and we felt strongly enough to make sure that they were positioned into the '24 budget to make sure that the funding was secured for them, they would continue moving forward.
Thank you. Colleagues? Mr. Stauffer?
How close are we to achieving the $60,000 starting salary mandated by the blueprint?
We are 1.7 or 1.9, Eric? Right. So, all right. So, right, 2 things. I was going to one thing and you went to the other. We are 1.95% away from the 10% requirement, which is due by June 30, 2024, so before the end of the current fiscal cycle. And on the $60,000 rate, which is for July 1, 2026, I believe it's a little more than $2,000, $2,200. Starting salary is now north of $57,000, and we have to hit to $60,000. So we're just a couple $1,000s away.
Well, in this year's budget, I would like to see, where possible, that we achieve the salary increases that we were not able to fund last year. We keep kicking the can down the road. We're going to be okay probably attracting new teachers, but the middle of the scale, the top of the scale, in what it should be, and everybody sitting here knows that's the case. And if we don't do that, we're going to be hiring new teachers and losing teachers, losing experience, and so forth. I mean, I know of a young lady who's a daughter of a friend of mine, first-year teacher. She went to Frederick County, going to make a little bit more money, and so forth. So I'd like to see that done where possible, because if we don't, we're going to be in trouble down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Mr. Gaspard?
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. I just have a couple quick questions. Concerning the contingency teachers that we have in the past, we've budgeted, over the last 2 years, how many did we budget for and then did we actually get? It seems like in the past we've had higher numbers and then we've lowered it because of that. Do we know where we were the last 2 years? Have we decreased it a lot or just a few?
Typically, the number has been 3, but I feel like in the FY23 budget, because the funding was so lean in 23, the budget was 0 for contingency teachers.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct. Last year, we came before the board, and because of overcrowding, requested some additions to address specific overcrowding, in particular at the elementary level. And through the budget process, we came forward with what I consider to be minimal contingency of 3.
So we're not going to be receiving our study yet until what, October for the student population, and how much we'll be receiving from the state? Is that in October?
So most of the funding numbers are predicated on the September 30 enrollment. Pre-K, EL, and foundation are predicated on September 30. I believe special education is based on October 31, and compensatory education is based on October 31. Once that data is solidified, we should be able to look at the statutory rates for each of those categories and start to develop what we think our new revenue will be for FY25. You may recall a year and a half ago, we gave a presentation on the blueprint, probably June of 2022, and FY25 is one of the bleakest years in the foundation, in part for 2 reasons. One, there's not very much new funding. The foundation rate moves very little, and all the other rates are predicated on the foundation rate. So it moves very little. And second to that is, as we look at how enrollment is calculated, in by coming in here in September 2023 and grabbing our new enrollment for September 2023, we are going to lose, it's based on the 3-year average. The anchor year right now is September 2019, which of course is the last enrollment before the pandemic. Enrollment has not fully returned. So we're going to lose a high year and pick up a fairly low year. And so the likelihood is our 3-year, if we don't meet projections, our 3-year average will go down, which means we can expect to receive less funding.
And so how about our ELL students? Are we going to see an increase again this year with them, do you think?
I do expect we'll see an increase in EL students.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Murray.
I just want to say I agree with Mr. Stauffer about salaries for our staff members. I would like to see that fully funded in the next budget year. And the other thing I have, and it may be a silly question, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to wrap my brain around the blueprint. What does $63 per student in technology look like? What would that look like?
So ultimately, it's a net sum of roughly 1.6 million or 1.2 million. I think it might be 1.3 million. So that is the amount of which we need to pull from our foundation to increase our technology spend. And that increase is predicated on, making sure that you're spending at least $63 a student more. So they'll look at our foundation rate, $63, that's the amount that will have to be added. We can spend that however we see fit. Could be on devices, could be on staffing, could be on software, but we determine how we spend that. And then it doubles in FY26 and goes up again by another $63 for FY27.
So this isn't money they're giving us, is it? Is it money we are putting in our budget?
It has to be carved out of the increase in foundation. So the foundation rate per student goes up into FY '25, and out of that increase, we have to carve $63 per student out and earmark it to technology.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Prue, the 110,000 for National Board benefits costs, benefits being like healthcare, or benefits being like when everybody passes in December, we have raises?
It is, and Eric, good, Eric's coming up. You got me into the nitty gritty, and I need a lifeline.
The 110,000 that we put in fixed charges was sort of like tuition reimbursement, where we have to pay like a third of the cost, and the state shares that cost with us to reimburse the teacher for becoming nationally board certified.
Okay, so where is, in the blueprint, the additional salaries that we will have to pay in December?
It's in the salary line.
Okay.
And while I'm up here, I'll come back to a question. I believe earlier you were asking what the total of the other initiatives
did.
were
I
that
did.
we funded in FY '24. Those positions that we funded in FY '24 were about 813,000. And then of the 4 positions that we didn't fund, they were around 344,000.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good lifeline.
It's the best. And Mr. Brandenburg just came up also as a reminder, as we think about National Board Certified Teachers, while they earn their certification in December, the funding doesn't come until the following year.
Mr. Snyder, you had a question?
I believe Mr. Emmons.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, do you know how much of the budget going into the dual credit tuition and the dual enrollment support is going into professional development, if any, for the teachers supporting the classes in high schools?
I think that number, and Dr. Willow, whether he's got something carved out in grants, in terms of the general fund, there's a part of that that's also on HCC, but
So the money that Mr. Prue shared that's in the budget is for the cost of tuition, fees, and textbooks. Professional development actually comes from another line within the account. And HCC is also responsible for some of that professional learning, and that's why our teachers receive a stipend. So it works both ways.
Okay, thank you.
So I actually thought another board member was going to ask this question, but all this stuff obviously adds quite a bit is quite a bit of money. I think it's safe to say that all of the stuff that we're prioritizing right now will not be funded under what would be required to be increased if we kept all the same spending. So what would we be prepared to cut in order to meet what our priorities are?
I want to think about your question and how I propose that answer. So similar to Mrs. Williams' question earlier, when we come forward with a proposed budget, we usually show you how we would allocate the new revenue that we have. That budget document also shares places where we go line by line. We've already scheduled the meetings for this October with all of the staff to review each line item. I think it would be premature at this point to say that we've identified places that we could go ahead and cut from the budget. So for instance, if the new money, let's say, was $6 million and that's all we had, but the budget priorities were, valued at, let's say, 13 or 14 million, we'd have to find $6 or $7 million or decide that what we have now is more important than what potentially is a new priority. I hope that helps. I mean, the items that you see here that are funded in '24, in theory, are funded until said time that staff says, I don't really need that, or the board recommends maybe a reduction in program. So I hope that answers your question.
And I'll
It
just,
does.
I'll expand on Mr. Prue's comments and appreciate the question. And it is, at this stage, it's really, it is premature to consider cuts. And recognizing, if you look at this, this overview that's before you, you can see that this board had to make some hard decisions regarding cuts. There were some staffing positions that did not make it. But as we've discussed, probably the most significant hit was the salary initiative. And where we are, we recognize that some of our competition and surrounding districts, they had stronger funding, which allowed them to have stronger salary initiatives, in many cases around 7%, along with addressing some of the staffing challenges that I believe most districts have faced in terms of more challenging behaviors with students and so forth. Arguably, from a staffing standpoint, looking at the end of last year, and thanks to the proactive nature of this board, mid-year, there were a number of positions, safety and security assistants, as well as BCBAs that were added in, and we received very positive feedback from our teachers, our staff members, in terms of their ability to support the needs of students. So at this point, I think, and it is premature to even say that we may not have additional staffing needs. I think the reality is we will have to look at our grant funds and evaluate perhaps some of the positions, can they be sustained through grant funds? Are adjustments going to have to be made there? Perhaps are there fewer staffing needs in comparison to last year? Because, as we talk with building level team members and senior staff, they're certainly coming out of the pandemic and with some of the challenges faced, the feedback we were receiving that we just needed to do more staffing wise. And we're receiving very positive, encouraging feedback this year. However, the most significant gap, and I would agree with the comments in terms of salary initiative being perhaps the most significant need moving forward, recognizing the size of our district. I believe to move the teacher group 1 percentage point, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mr. Prue, or other members, but I believe it's just north of $1 million just for that one unit to move 1%. So it is a pretty significant lift when you consider the number of employees that we have in all of our units, over 3,000.
So, and I'll just say the reason why I asked that question is, I could think of two very specific positions that we just recently hired that I would have a pretty easy time arguing don't meet any of these priorities. And my concern is that we're sitting here making our priorities, and then as time moves on, they kind of shift. So what we determine our priorities are, I would hope that we can stick with that, because I think if we did do that, we definitely could have given all of the salary increases that we wanted to last year, in my personal opinion. But we kind of fell straight away from our priorities. And, the two positions that I'm thinking of, they nearly doubled that $178,000 inflationary deficit that we had there too. So my hope is that when we do get down to the nitty-gritty of this budget, that we can really adhere to what we're prioritizing. I would love to be able to give staff the fair wages, especially a lot of our parapros that have to really do, really kind of get their hands dirty. I would love to be able to give them significantly more money. That is an extremely difficult job. There's just so many other things that we can do there with our salary, and also school safety, honestly, is my number one. I just hope that we adhere to these priorities so that, as time moves forward, we don't kind of shift that.
And And thank you for those comments, and in particular with safety and security, I believe, and I agree, I think that targeted area, there were significant gains and perhaps some additional opportunities to expand, as we've referenced. The safety and security assistants are supporting our city middle and high schools, but we recognize that there may be an opportunity to expand, and that will that initiative to benefit all of our secondary schools. Also recognizing our paraprofessionals. In terms of the salary initiative, that was the one unit where we were nearly able to achieve the initial goal. We had to reduce a little bit. I believe that was right around 2%, but that was the unit that received the most significant increase, and certainly recognizing the local market and the challenge with minimum wage. That is an area that we want to continue to be strong in.
Thank you.
I have an additional question. Are we still, at this point, we were talking about we have the deadline to get to 60,000. We obviously were the highest. Are we still the highest starting salary in Maryland, or have we been passed yet?
I believe that's accurate, but I haven't seen an analysis of where Wynn is for the start of this year.
I would want to check that. I believe we are still one of the leading districts in terms of starting teacher pay, but I believe maybe one or two districts may have caught up and surpassed us this past year, but I would want our team to look at that. But we're still very competitive at the starting range. Where we lose our competitive nature is as we move down the salary scale in terms of experience, in particular 10 and 15 years and beyond. We are still, in terms of the question, I believe Mr. Stauffer referenced earlier in terms of the percentage, we're, as was emphasized earlier, we're just a little over a percentage point of achieving that, but that is something that we will need to achieve by the end of this academic year.
But because we were ahead of the game, it means we're not playing catch up as much. So we were pretty fiscally prudent to see that coming and raise our salary.
Absolutely. There are most districts that are significantly under the gun, and there's a tremendous gap that exists in most districts across Maryland.
So I'll ask, we led the way with starting salaries. I think we were one of the first to have security vestibules in all of our buildings. We were certainly the first county to offer universal pre-K. What's our next, if you guys pie in the sky, what's our next area that we would lead in when it comes to the rest of the state?
Also leading in apprenticeships, so we're doing fine.
Oh, yeah, we're leading in apprenticeships,
We're
absolutely.
doing fine with regard to implementation of CTE
I think
initiatives.
as you look at the board's priorities, recognizing that retaining and attracting and looking at the challenges with the workforce, I think salaries and competitive benefits is certainly something that is ongoing, that most districts are striving to improve in. I think the other area, clearly safety and security and mental health and behaviors, we've made significant strides this year. We're still analyzing. There may be some needs to make further adjustments. We may find that there are new grant funds that allow us to support the needs in that area, reducing the need for additional positions similar to what occurred last year. So I believe looking at where we are and to continue to retain and attract the salary and overall compensation package and benefits is something that I believe is not only important for FY25, but likely over the next couple years.
Dr. Savine, I heard you the first time you said that, and I agree 100%. I too agree with Mr. Bickford. I think my number one priority is salary and compensation for the purpose of attracting and retaining staff. And I do think we have made strides in the area of safety and security, mental health, and behavioral support. So I would like to see us maintain in that area. And if, after assessing, if there are changes that can be made there, that we make those adjustments, whether it's that the need is no longer there, only I don't see how that could possibly be, or that it can be shifted to grant funding. But those would be the two areas in that order that would be my priorities. So colleagues, we are a good hour into this work session, and we have an agenda topic number 2. Is there any further discussion or any further questions that?
I was thinking, just thinking out loud, another area that I know we're making strides on, as you brought up, we're leading an apprenticeship. So I'm thinking another way we lead in the state. Wouldn't it be great if we truly found that we were leading on growing our own, so that we're training teachers, they come into our school system, we're training nurses, they get hired at Meritus, and people stayed in the county and remain taxpayers in the county. I think most of us here grew up in the county, so that'd be sort of fun to brag about in a few years.
And not only growing our own in terms of educators, but growing our own in terms of law enforcement officers.
Absolutely.
Because there is a need in that area as well. We know of having had that discussion with
Absolutely.
law enforcement.
President Williams, just for clarification, kind of thinking ahead, because this is a work session, the goal would be here in an upcoming meeting, as is tradition, to put the budget priorities in front of the board for action. As we discussed last year, and in this process, I would recommend in consideration that we keep those 4 priorities consistent, but hearing the discussion from the board, recognizing that maybe combating inflation is something we hope that this year will be kinder. We don't know that, but that's something we can look at in terms of as we come forward with a proposed budget later on in January. If there are ways that we can trim in that area, we'll continue to do so, just like we did last year. Certainly, the meeting the blueprint requirements, those are things that are kind of we're charged with, and we will navigate that the best we can, and recognizing at least the discussion that I've heard, and certainly I'll yield to the full board, but it sounds like, based on the discussion, there's a strong level of agreement and focus in terms of salaries and compensation, as well as keeping safety and security and mental health and behavior supports as a focus. Now, recognizing that, as is the case in any budget year, there are challenges in terms of your needs tend to exceed the level of funding. As you heard, looking at, in particular, with mental health and behavioral supports, our team is aggressively looking at partnerships and tapping into state grant dollars that will allow us to support those needs over time. But I can't say with certainty there will not be staffing needs in those areas that we may need to consider for the general fund. But for the purpose of the work session, as superintendent and staff, as we prepare the next agenda item, I would recommend for consideration that we maintain the 4 priorities, but I have heard, and I believe staff has heard, while those 4 priorities are up for consideration for the board to potentially take action, recognizing based on this discussion that there's a desire to really hone in on safety and security, mental health, and salaries, with salaries being a number one focus. Now, I'll pause there, President Williams, and I want to make sure that I've captured that accurately, representing the consensus of the board there.
Is that the consensus of the board?
That's where I'm at, yeah.
Is everyone there? Mr. Gesver, you're nodding?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, yes. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So colleagues, that will bring to conclusion our first portion of today's agenda, the budget, and we will now move to our second item, which is the 2022-2023 Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program, fondly known as MCAP, and the results. And so, Dr. Savine, I'll turn it over so you can introduce staff.
Thank you, President Williams. And considering the time, I will simply introduce Dr. Willow and our team members from Curriculum Instruction Team, Amy Seiler, our Supervisor of K-12 Math and Science, as well as Carly Pumphrey, our Supervisor of K-12 English, Language Arts, and Social Studies. Naturally, Dr. Willow is our Associate Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction. We do have some positive trends to share regarding MCAP results. Dr. Willow.
Good evening, President Williams, members of the board. We're going to start by highlighting some of the accomplishments. And I want to be clear, while there are a lot of victories, and we do want to celebrate some of these, we are not where we want to be yet either. And you'll see that in the data as we go through. But I still think it's essential to celebrate what's right. Our teachers, our administrators, our paraprofessionals, our lead teachers who have worked extremely hard, the Division of Curriculum, to rebound from COVID in a lot of cases, and also celebrating all-time highs. We went back, we looked at MCAP and PARC, which was before MCAP, some of you will remember, and we were not able to find a time where when you take grades 3 through 10 in English Language Arts and you combine them, that we're top 10 in both English Language Arts and top 10 in mathematics. So while we're celebrating that we've reached that milestone, we know that there's still more work to be done. When we specifically look at English Language Arts, we were 6th in the state in 10th grade English Language Arts, and I think that'll be one that Ms. Pumphrey is going to share a little bit more about. And then, of course, 8th place in 8th grade English Language Arts. And again, these were all-time high proficiency rates for English MCAP and or PARC if we combine them. Again, looking at math, top 10 in math, 6th place in Algebra 1, and 9th place in 8th grade math. And while not focusing today on MISA, but 5th grade MISA, we were 6th in the state. And we wanted to show this in a slightly different way. And I'm taking English 10 as an example, and I want to take a minute here to explain to you board members and to our audience what you're looking at. I could have taken English 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, or any of the math assessments, and what you would see is a pretty similar chart. Okay, you might not see that we're 6th, you might see we're 8th, or 9th, or 7th, depending on what assessment we're looking at. But I do think it's important to look at where we rank in terms of our farm percentage. So what you're looking at here are all of the LEAs in Maryland, and you're looking at their high school farm percentage. And in the third column, you're looking at the percent proficient. And with the exception of a few counties, if I was to put this on a graph, it would be a fairly straight line, meaning that the higher the farm rate, the lower the percent proficient rate. We're an exception to that rule. And I think that goes to the hard work, again, of what we were talking about earlier of the Division of Curriculum team, our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our principals, lead teachers, assistant principals, and senior staff. And so we're very proud that in a lot of ways, we're performing at a much higher rate than counties that have similar or even lower farm percentage ranks. And while we didn't add it to this slide, I think it's also important to note that we were 20th in overall funding. And what that means is when you look at a student ratio of looking at state and local dollars, we were 20th in the state of overall spending, and yet still remaining as a top performing system. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Seiler.
All right, good evening. So what you have here in front of you, just a quick review of the data chart here. This is specific to MCAP for math from spring 2023. So just quickly there, going across the top, you have your grade levels. That MAT 03 is third grade. Then going to your right, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth, all the way up through Algebra 1. Looking down the left-hand column there, you have your WCPS percent proficient, which combines our level 3 and level 4 performance levels together. Level 4 being the distinguished learner, a level 3 are proficient learners, level 2 are developing learners, level 1, again, still going down the left-hand side there, are beginning learners, and then finally the bottom row shows Maryland percent proficient, which again combines for the state of Maryland, level 3 with level 4. So that's a quick look at what you have there in front of you. A couple things that I notice when I look at this chart, comparing the Maryland percent proficient, the bottom row, to the top row of data, our WCPS percent proficiency, with the exception of third grade, which is only 1% off. WCPS is performing higher in all of those grade levels and courses in mathematics at this time than the state of Maryland as a whole. And back to what Dr. Willa mentioned here just a moment ago, certainly we are proud of that and the work of our teachers and administrators, and we recognize we certainly still have work to do there as well. Just kind of a couple of other things that stand out to me here. Our level 4 performance, not critiquing the test per se, but it does, just from a statistical perspective, cause me to tilt my head just a little bit, in that we do have some other local assessments, our math inventory all the way up through SAT, for example, that I think does show that we have students performing at a higher distinguished level than what we're seeing here on the MCAP for math. So just something that stands out to me there a little bit. Wait, you moved me on. Our level 3s there you see next is our proficiency. Level 2 is highlighted in yellow the whole way across, because for almost every grade level that carries kind of the biggest bubble of students in our developing learners. And I'll speak a little bit more to our developing learners in level 2 for both math and ELA here in just a little bit. And in level 1, something that stands out here that I think is exciting, when you look at fifth grade, typically in elementary school, even back pre-COVID on Park and things, we saw about a 20% continuously hovering in that level 1 area, and our fifth grade broke that 20%. We're down under 20% in that level 1, and that's something that those will be current sixth graders are really excited to look at the students and what they're bringing to the table. So a lot of great things, though, our students are bringing to the table, especially in that level 2 area. A lot of opportunity right on the cusp here for us in Washington County. All right, so taking a look at growth. So again, just a quick look at what this chart is showing you. You have across the bottom, looking at overall, this is percent proficient again in 2018 and 2019, going from left to right across the bottom. You see Washington County in green, which is the line that stays to the top there, Maryland in blue. And then we jump to 2022, post-COVID, and 2023 there. So just taking a look at our the change over the years, certainly in mathematics, Neither Washington County nor the state has yet returned to those pre-COVID proficiency rates. And we also certainly take a look at our rate of growth. So looking at 2022 to 2023, I noticed that the slant of that line for Maryland in blue is a bit steeper in the upward direction than ours is in Washington County. So again, we are showing evidence of some recovery, but perhaps not at the rate of the state of Maryland at this point. On the previous slide there a moment ago, you may have noticed middle school tends to be our struggle point right now. I think, though, coming into this school year, we have a lot of things in place for our middle school, including common structure for the amount of 90 minutes of mathematics every day guaranteed to every student in every middle school, which is not something that has been consistent across the years that you see here. And certainly our middle school grades 6, 7, and 8 are a large chunk of our students here, in addition to our new resources and things that you have supported as well. So also with that 90 minutes of math is that 60 minutes of excellent Tier 1 instruction and 30 minutes of supplemental instruction guaranteed to every student in grades 3 through 8. And the resources that some of you recall me sitting in front of you last spring requesting purchase for to support our supplemental instruction are things that you supported that are in place as of this current school year. So really teachers have been excited and shared a lot of positive feedback already just here in the first week of school about those new resources and the opportunities that brings for additional growth for our students in grades 3 through 8. And then finally, in Algebra 1 for high school, this is telling a pretty exciting story here, I think, for our Algebra 1 students. Again, comparing 2018 to 19 and then jumping post-COVID 22 to 23. Again, Washington County remains higher than the state across all of those years, but also looking at rate of growth. The slant of our WCPS line is steeper than that of Maryland's, showing a faster rate of growth and recovery in Washington County in Algebra 1. And we attribute that to a few things, including 90 minutes of Algebra 1 last school year for all of our students, which again included that 60 minutes guaranteed time of instruction at grade level, as well as 30 minutes of supplemental instruction to support students with where they were ready to learn and what they needed to access that grade level learning. So super excited for our Algebra 1 teachers and their extreme focus they had last year and seeing evidence of that in our data.
Okay, now you'll see some similar charts, but through the lens of MCAP ELA. So again, you see ELA grades 3 through 10, performance levels, same chart as math, and there is still a lot to celebrate. We are above the state average in every grade level in ELA. You will notice on this particular chart, those performance level 2s, which are just below our proficiency at a pretty high percentage. If you look at performance level 1, pretty low percentage, and that's exciting. That's our lowest levels of learners. Again, students that are making progress, but not quite there. If you look at English 10, ELA 10, only 3.7% of our students in English 10 are at a level 1. This chart shows our growth across time in grades 3 through 8 for ELA. So we have some all-time high percentages here. You'll notice that we, again, above the state average in every grade level, but also we are above pre-pandemic rates of proficiency. That is definitely worth celebrating. We are exceeding where we were before the pandemic, and we continue to increase. Obviously, there is still work to do. We do want more than 50% of our students to be proficient. We have work to do, and we're excited about the trajectory of more and more students are becoming confident and successful readers and writers, according to this data. Next chart. One word that comes to mind, and it's remarkable. I was so excited to share this data with our high school And really, this is not just English teachers, by the way. The English MCAP is a literacy assessment. There's a lot of content. This is informational text, literary text, writing, written expression, written conventions, vocabulary. Our content teachers actually contribute to the learning and literacy for all of our students. So again, a big shout out to all of our teachers across the grade levels and in all content.
All right, so I had shared earlier I'd be returning to those level 2s that in both the math and ELA charts you saw earlier were highlighted in yellow. And so last year when the 2022 data came out from the state, there was a big discussion about the students on the cusp of proficiency. And so we certainly wanted to follow that and see if that continued to be a trend this year and where we sat as a county in terms of on the cusp of proficiency. So when you look at that, on the cusp of proficiency, we are looking at our level 2s or our developing learners, but more specifically within that batch of level 2s, we're looking at students who were on average within 1 to 3 questions of being 1 to 3 questions. Correct? What am I saying that wrong? On average, 1 to 3 correct answers from scoring proficient. Needed to reverse my words there. So close. Yes, so close, right? And so with that, that's within about 10 scale points of proficiency. So again, within that level 2 band, we're talking about students who were this close, even closer. And so here you see on the left is math, on the right is ELA, and it shows the count. So just as an example there for grade 3 in math, there were 234 students, or 14.7% of all third graders who were within 1 to 3 questions of being proficient. So putting that into perspective, whether you're thinking about the math or the ELA MCAP assessment, each one of those is split over 4 sessions where you're answering questions in each of those sessions, right? So in 4 sessions, if I'm one of those students, I needed to get 1, 2, or 3 more questions correct across those 4 sessions, right? Super, super close. And again, putting that in yet just a little bit different light, thinking about, for example, the Algebra 1, if those 349 students, or that close to 19% of students, were to go across that line, so to speak, with those 1 to 3 more questions correct, then we would jump from about 26% proficient to almost 45% proficient in Algebra 1. Or if you liken that to English 10 up here on your screen, if we get that 18% in English 10, then we go from about 66% proficient to 84% of our students proficient. So that is how close we are in Washington County to making that next jump for the sake of our students, which is super exciting. And so then the question leads us to, so how do we intend to do that, right?
So we've already discussed a few of the high-quality instructional materials that, again, thank you very much, Board of Ed, for supporting that. We are definitely in CKLA for elementary grades, well, pre-K through 5, full implementation. Thank you very much for that support. Also, we have high-quality instructional materials in math as well. The common schedule, we already discussed. Common schedule allows for us to have some equitable and consistent time for students to learn both reading and math. And specifically in middle school, the 90 minutes of ELA and math really allows for that 60 minutes of grade level instruction, but also dedicated time for supplemental instruction, dedicated time for those students who are right on the cusp, who just need a little bit extra support. So that is in all of our middle schools, and actually in all K through 12, we have the supplemental instruction built in. Collaborative planning and professional learning. As our teachers are learning best practices, they're then able to use those with our students in the classroom. And the data-driven supplemental instruction, you again help support the purchase of the extension to Synergy, which allows for the early warning system, EWS, and MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support that will allow that systems approach to making sure that our students, that we have the data at the teacher's fingertips, that they can identify when a student is is struggling, starting to struggle, and we can provide the support for them. So thank you very much.
I just once again want to thank our curriculum instruction team and what you do to support our teachers and school level administrators that are doing the heavy lifting regarding this work. You can see some very positive results in comparison to the other districts across the state, but still room for improvement. I just want to emphasize we have targeted a pretty significant number of students that were on the cusp, 1 or 2 questions away from achieving that goal of being proficient, and we have strategies in place to move them forward in the next assessment cycle, and we can see, I think we're positioned for even greater gains in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Savant. Colleague, thank you, Dr. Willow.
Both. Okay. First, in addition to all the people we've already applauded, you, teachers, administrators, we also have to add that group of students. The students are working really, really hard. And then my question is, are we tracking student apprentice kids so that we know in 3 years who had apprentices?
We do keep track of those that completed an apprenticeship for us. That could be as early as their junior year, senior year. It is a little more difficult to track beyond high school because obviously we're limited to what we get data-wise back. We're at the mercy of some of the colleges and the reporting institutions, but we do try to keep track of that as much as possible. But again, once they leave us, they're under no obligation to report or share data.
More specifically, the third graders who had student apprentice teachers.
Totally missed that question right over my head
First,
there.
second.
So, yes, that was the data I think we presented back in August. And so we're able to see not only how much of an intervention, how much time they spent with their tutor, but what intervention they used, along with how long the intervention went, pre-scores, post-scores. And we're able to track that. And then again, Ms. Pumphrey might remember the exact number, but we have a number of students that no longer need additional intervention in the 23-24 school year because the gap was closed during the 22-23 school year.
Go ahead, Graham.
I would just like to say that 84% figure on the English 10 is really commendable, and I want to thank you guys for your hard work. That's really impressive.
I have a question. On the line graphs of math 3 to 8, Park/MCAP 2018-2023, so 2018, 2019, we were still giving the Park test?
I think MCAP's first year, Park ended in 2019. That's correct.
So since then, we had COVID and all that and so forth, but is there any chance that the Park exams were easier than the MCAP test?
It's possible. It's still a little too early to tell with MCAP only having the 2 years of data. I think the bigger challenge would be some of the gaps that occur in math naturally missing the 2 years. COVID was not easy for a number of our students. Remember, we ran a reduced schedule when we were virtual. And I think unlike English language arts, where you're focusing on the same standards, obviously different text complexity as you get older, as you progress. Math has new standards every year, and they build on top of each other. And I think coming out of the pandemic, we know there are still some gaps that were caused during the pandemic. I will say, I think, the support you had, I'll add one more group, our parents, to Dr. Zentmeyer's earlier statement. There were a lot of parents that were very supportive while students were on Zoom learning math. But we also know that there were a number of students that were on Zoom learning math on their own with the support of their teacher. And that's not just I don't think it's quite the same as being in the classroom every day with a math teacher, my tutors, my paras support. So, Mr. Stauffer, I think it could be part of that, but I also think when we look across the state, we just know that it's going to take a little bit longer with our math gaps.
Colleagues, any further questions?
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. So the changes, we've got a new test that might be a little harder, but we also have new reporting that can drill down to the student level where before it was more general reporting, right? So now we can actually target students that we know are within one or two questions?
What we have now, we've always been able, parents will get a report of how their students performed on MCAP, just like they received a report for how students performed on PARCC, and before that, HSA, MSA, and we could probably keep going back on the different variations of assessments. What is new this year in the teacher's gradebook, they're able to take that assessment and drill down not just to the overall score, but looking at those sub-scores to see where a particular student needs additional support. In the past, I would have had to use multiple different reports and sit there and analyze. Now it's at the teacher's disposal. It's also color-coded to easily identify where that weakness exists, or that opportunity for improvement, I should say, exists. And I think that is, again, in a world where we often hear there is a lot on our teachers, administrators, central office plates to be able to quickly look at a student and be able to see strengths and areas for growth is a game changer in data management and also how I plan for day-to-day instruction.
I think that extra $63 we have to spend, that sounds like good investment if we're working towards giving teachers tools so they can identify those students who just are just that close and just move them to the next level. That's fantastic. Not that I'm spending Jeff Prew's money already.
I kind of want to piggyback off that. There's obviously a lot of good happening here, right? Our kids are improving. We're better than the state average. My concern is, and I really wish we wouldn't do this so much where we compare ourselves to other counties, right? We need to worry about what we're doing and what our kids are doing. And looking at this, and I don't want to make it sound negative, but I don't know another way to say it. At the end of the day, even if you go back to 2018 when what Mr. Stauffer was talking about, 2/3 of our kids were not proficient. Fast forward to today, 3/4 of our kids are not proficient in math. And thankfully it's flipped around a little bit for ELA, but still, if you look at 1/3 of our kids, that's roughly 7,300 kids in a county of 22,000, right? So going back to our budget discussion that we just spent an hour on and what we can do as a board, at the end of the day, it's great to get these updates, but we need to have some kind of a deliverable that we can go and act on so you guys can improve. What is it that we're missing that we should be providing for you guys so that you can provide the support for those kids to get them, who cares about what the state's doing? I care about what our kids are doing. What are we missing that we need to give you guys?
I think, Mr. Evans, your question and the validity of the point that you made is spot on. We openly acknowledge, even before the pandemic, we weren't where we needed to be. Not just us, but to your point, many students across the state of Maryland. This board did, over the past year, give us a number of tools that we are implementing for the first time in 23-24. So the middle school math resource, the new schedule, the new data management system, additional tutors. Now, those are in grants. We know, the research is clear, the best way to close a gap is in small group instruction. And great tier 1 instruction, but also the opportunity to get additional support to meet your needs. Think of it in terms of, as a former coach, it's the same thing that we do out on the field, right? We break things down to those individual players to build the skill sets where they're weak. And for the first time going into this year, we do have tier 1 consistent resources in math and ELA, but also those tier 2 supports. which are essential. As we go forward, we're going to continue to look at the work that our tutors have done, have completed, I should say. They are in several different grants, but we're hopeful that through grants that recur, that we can keep a number of them in those grants, because we do know not just our high school apprentices, but our tutors, our paraprofessionals, in conjunction with our teachers, are making a big difference day to day. And I think that's why we are trending back in the right direction. But I want to also be clear. We're not sitting here while we're celebrating that in some ways ELA is at an all-time high. We clearly know that we can do better, and that if we work as a team with the right resources, the right tools, we're confident we're going to continue to trend in the right direction.
So I guess, and that's great, and I realize that we did just add a bunch of those mass supports, so that were dearly needed, to say the least. Is there a way, as we go through this budget process, I mean, we're looking at getting a draft budget, I think in January, if I remember correctly. Is there a way, as we go through this process, that we can have some of that information updated, where maybe we do add a priority or whatever if we need to, if we find out that, hey, this is working, but this would be really helpful to kind of complement, some of those resources that we're providing. Is there a way that we could kind of get a report back sometime? I mean, obviously you can't do it now, but after the first quarter or something like that, is that something we could get a report back on?
We can continue to look, and we have, I think, we worked on presentations in CNI before, but we have our local assessments. And if you remember, I think we've presented math inventory in front of this board before, DIBELS in front of this board. Those are given 2 to 3 times a year, depending on grade level and subject area. So I think we could easily come back here later in the fall after we get the reasonable amount of time to work the new resources, see usually that's right around that what we call the winter take, and definitely give updates.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
So Dr. Willow, I heard you say that Washington County is ranked 20th in overall spending and funding in the state, correct?
State and local money added up, yes.
Okay. And I heard you say that these additional supports that our children are getting, tutors and such, are coming from grants, correct?
For personnel, most are coming from grants. That is
Okay.
accurate.
So, to my knowledge, Washington County doesn't fund reading specialists per se, do they? Or...
We have content specialists in the area
Okay, but
of
no one
reading.
that focuses specifically on reading, or a specialist in the area of reading.
No, we have, our lead teachers are considered instructional coaches in all of the content.
Okay.
But no, to answer your question, we don't have
Okay,
that position.
So would we do better by our students if there were to be additional funding, aside from grant funding that you can't rely on year to year, that would enable us to provide the necessary supports to these students that are coming to us who need them? And I'm reminded of what our farm rate is, and I'm reminded of the deficit that our students come to us, both in the area of reading and math. So it has something to do with the funding, don't you think? And what we're able to provide as a system in terms of personnel and materials?
I think funding is one variable. I also think as you also stated, the free and reduced rate, the lack of, if we went back and we factored pre-K into this, where we know we were 23rd in kindergarten readiness, that's only a few years back. And we have to remember that 23rd, and we talk about it, kindergarten readiness, those are our middle school students now. Those are our high school students. They came with gaps. And while we've made progress, we're not where we need to be. So I think there's a couple variables, but I think funding is obviously one of them.
So our pre-K students, those that we we're starting to see the results of that pre-K initiative,
Correct.
correct?
Yes,
So that was a tremendous investment.
it was. One made by this Board of Education.
Thank you, Dr. Willow. Colleagues? Any further questions? Dr. Willow, Mrs. Pumphrey, Mrs. Seiler, thank you so much for bringing the good news to us and making us aware of the work that we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, anything? No? Tired?
7th inning stretch.
Seventh inning stretch? Okay, no further comments, questions? Dr. Savai? Well, I thank you. This was the first work session of this type, and I'm going to declare it a success. I know I received a lot of information and appreciate the conversation and the discussion that happened between members and that we had as a board. So thank you all for your participation today. Staff, thank you. Again, Dr. Sovine, thank you. And we'll bring this to a close.